Hey Rooted fam, welcome to my channel.
Yes, I know, a journalist holding the phone talking to herself on the internet. My ancestors did not survive for this. But here we are. In 2026, journalism isn't just about reporting the news accurately. It's about competing with the algorithm. The clock is shorter than ever. You've got minutes, sometimes seconds, to report, verify, contextualize, and not get sued. Meanwhile, a content creator can just go live, say whatever they want, add a ring light and a conspiracy, and call it breaking. And the wild part? Pew Research finds Gen Z trusts creators just about as much as legacy news, which means to some people, my deeply reported story is just as credible as a shade room headline that starts with allegedly and ends with chaos. Anyone with Wi-Fi can be a correspondent these days. Verification is optional. But confidence is not. And honestly, even Megan Thee Stallion clocked this. She pointed out how a big font, bold background can look like a fact, even when it absolutely needs a footnote, source, and a deep breath.
The big font, bold background, don't read that.
And that's exactly the problem. We've trained ourselves to read presentation as proof. So if you can say it loudly, clearly, and with the right graphics, congratulations, you've broken the news. And sure, there are benefits to being the messenger. Just take our guest, Don Lemon. Getting fired from CNN in 2023 may have been the best severance package of all time. His independent show is booming. The money's up, the access is direct, and there's no pressure from executives for him to code switch. But his decades-long journalism career hasn't come without controversy, the latest being his coverage of an anti-ICE protest inside a Minnesota church. What some saw as boots-on-the-ground reporting, others saw as activism. Some loved it, while others rejected it as true journalism. Which brings us to Black journalists as a whole, because when we report with context, history, and lived experience, it's called editorializing. But when white journalists do it, it's called authority. For centuries, white hegemonic values have defined what objective looks like, sounds like, and quotes like. So when Black journalists accurately name racism, power, or harm, suddenly it's bias. That disconnect breeds distrust. And when audiences don't trust the media that claims to speak for everyone, but fails to represent them all, they turn to familiar faces who are spreading falsehoods. Just look at bloggers Milagro Grams or Tasha K. In those cases, misinformation was able to get past us like Cole Thomas Allen running past that security guard. Still, independent journalism has its perks. From Speedy Mormon to Don Lemon, journalists are building their own lanes. It's profitable, it's accessible, it's freeing. But here's the danger. When we lose the newsroom, we risk losing the systems that protect verification, pushback, and community accountability. The question isn't whether journalism will change. It already has. The real question is, how do we keep credibility without trimming away the truth? We know the problem. Now let's get to the root of it. I'm Paris Alston, and this is Rooted. So as we mentioned, today we're sitting down with Don Lemon. The longtime journalist has been on tour with an unlikely partner in crime, comedian D.L. Hughley, for their show, Anything Goes. We caught up with Lemon about that and what he's learned about being a journalist since his arrest earlier this year. So Don, you and comedian D.L. Hughley have teamed up for this really exciting tour, and you both have had roles that were really high profile at CNN and got really intense reactions along the political spectrum. So why was this a perfect pairing?
Well, for what you just said, it's a perfect pairing because I think we're high profile in the sense of how we feel about the current climate, what's happening in the country. DL is outspoken, even more outspoken than I am. And I've found that it's often easier for people to absorb information if there's some laughter in it. You know, when people call it, sometimes you smooth the beach or you ease the beach or whatever it's called, so that people can learn, through laughter. The truth is often spoken in jest, they say. So DL and I knew each other from a while back, and we did not always agree 100% on anything. We still don't, but there was a time when we did not agree on pretty much anything. And then, it took somebody getting us back together for us to become friends again.
And how can disagreement make two people who otherwise wouldn't be obvious allies really good teammates?
Well, look, this is layered because I don't like having beef or any sort of hostility. Not that it was hostile, but I don't like having any sort of thing with another black man that's high profile. I just don't like it. I think it's in this day and age, we don't need it, especially in this climate. And the other thing is that that's how life is. People don't agree with anyone 100% of the time. I love my mom and I love my husband more than any people on earth, but I don't always agree with them. And usually that's how if you can be that way in the most intimate and personal relationships that you have, why can't you be that way with other people? Now, it's tough in this environment when other people are saying that you shouldn't exist. So, I'm not saying that, we go that far, but I think it was important for people like DL and I to come together, again, especially in this environment, in this climate of division that is being sparked by the Trump regime, by Donald Trump. I think it's important for people to come together, and especially people of color, and be in community with each other.
And to that point, obviously, you've done a lot of critiquing of the right and the left leading up to this political moment. But there's constantly been this conversation about needing to reach across the aisle. And I feel like we're getting further and further away from that feeling reasonable in this moment. But do you think in this moment that there's anyone on the right that the left refuses to work with, that they probably should, to move ahead?
I'm not one of those people now. Like in normal times, in olden days,
which
in a time gone by, I would say, yeah, I know. I would say, okay, reach across the aisle. I don't think that works now. Nobody on the other side of the aisle wants to work with Democrats. And I think the Democrats should stop wasting their time and just get their acts together. We don't live in that time anymore. Perhaps it'll come back, but those are days gone by.
What does getting their act together look like?
Well, becoming stronger and becoming better politicians. Democrats are good at governing, but they're not really good at politicking. Republicans have, I think, I'm not necessarily sure it's the right idea, but it's an idea that works, and that is that they need to stick together and they need to win. The only way that you get power politically is if you win. And you don't get power politically if you're constantly canceling people. You don't get power politically if you're constantly criticizing. You don't get power politically if you're divided on certain issues. If you're not on point with the issues and with your messaging, and where we are right now, if you don't have a backbone, if you're too wishy-washy, if you're trying to reach across the aisle, if you're too mealy-mouthed, that's not going to play. I think Democrats and people who are not Trump supporters, who don't like what's going on, they want politicians who are going to fight back, who are going to speak the truth, and who aren't afraid to be human.
Now, humanity you were really front and center with it earlier this year when you were arrested in LA during your coverage of the violent federal immigration crackdown that was happening there. What did that moment teach you about real accountability versus punishment that's really just seemingly meant to intimidate people right now?
Well, it taught me that we can't really, sit back and rest on our laurels about our Constitution, about democracy, about our Bill of Rights, about this republic, and about norms. You can't really rely on the certain norms that had been relied upon before. You can't really rely on the law. You can't really rely on the Constitution, because the reason that I did what I did was because of the First Amendment. It was because of freedom of the press, which is informing people and going where the news is. However, I hate to call them administration, this regime does not believe in that. They believe in control. They don't want people, they believe in only that the First Amendment only applies to the people that they want it to apply to. And I think this is what I've learned is that our democracy, our Constitution, is hanging by a thread. We're at a very critical point right now where if we don't stand up for it, we will lose it. I think that too many people are sitting by. They don't understand just how big what happened to me, how big this is. But what happened to me is not just about me. It's really about the First Amendment and freedom of the press beyond, and the Constitution. There's a reason why the First Amendment is the First Amendment. It's because it's the bedrock of our Constitution. And without it, all of the other things don't stand. They fail. They fall. And so I think people need to realize that What happened to me has ramifications not only for broadcast journalism, but for print journalism, for radio, for television, for streaming, even for publishing. And if people can tell you what you can write, what you can't, what you can put on TV, what you can't, where you can report and where you can't, then this whole thing is over. This whole experiment is over.
And throughout this process, Don, and also going back to your forced departure from CNN, obviously you're a journalist, but you also have now evolved to have this title of influencer, one that you've said you embrace. So how does the story, and I'm specifically talking about this, the immigration story, how does it change when you suddenly become the center of it?
I was surprised that they did it, but not shocked. Because think about the people who were out there on the streets and who are still out there on the streets, and they're having their due process rights violated. Think about the people who don't have agency, who don't have a platform where they can speak out, and it's happening to them. There are still people who are locked up now in detention, I'm sure, who shouldn't be. Most of the people that they arrested or detained had no criminal records. And that's who they said that they were going to arrest and detain and deport, were people with no criminal records. So if it can happen to people who are American citizens, if it can happen to people who are not American citizens, which our Constitution covers, it says that all people, not just American citizens, deserve due process rights. So if it could happen to them, why wouldn't it happen to me? So it just really kind of solidified how I felt about the moment that we're in, is that we are living under a regime that abuses its power and that doesn't believe in the Constitution, especially the First Amendment and the freedom of the press.
And of course, we're already seeing more journalists being targeted. Do you think this issue is going to get worse as time goes on?
Well, yeah, I think it's what happened. It's not even, I think. Look, they're trying to chill journalism. They're trying to chill and intimidate journalists. Look at how they're suing media organizations and journalistic organizations. Look at how Donald Trump treats and talks about reporters. Look at how Caroline Levitt treats and talks about reporters. Look at how Pete Hegseth does. And any member of the Trump administration, J.D. Vance, any of them. They demonize reporters. They call them nasty. They call them piggy. They yell at them. They don't treat them with respect. They tell them what they can and cannot write over at the Pentagon, what they can and cannot publish at the Pentagon or put on television. They have to sign, a memorandum or an agreement, I should say, that they can, that the Pentagon, excuse me, can look and survey and approve what they are putting out. That is unheard of. That is so not the First Amendment. So, this administration doesn't believe in that. And as you said, what happened to me was a microcosm of what's happening in this country. But that's where we are right now, and we have to fight back.
Mm-hmm. And Don, I know that you've said before that journalists are not inanimate objects. And this is obviously an example of where you became very animate and you had to become, you were thrust into the spotlight in this way. I know that, I'm thinking back to Ferguson 2014, right? The way that you covered that story, you also were thrust into the middle of it, tear gassed, etc. But there was also some contention about how the Black community saw you in that moment, and how you reported on protesters there. How would you describe your evolution from that moment to this one?
Well, that's, you said the right word, 2014. That was, 12 years ago, which is, in many people, that's a lifetime for some people. I think my reporting, a lot of it was misunderstood. And simply, look, regardless of what side that you're on, you're going to get criticized. And if you're a journalist, at some point, you're going to get criticized because you have to report the truth. You have to report the facts. And especially if you're dealing with something that's being adjudicated in a federal system, you have to report what the other side is saying, what the investigation found, whether you agree with the investigation or not. And I think African Americans didn't agree with the Justice Department's investigation. And so who do they take it out on? They take it out on the messenger. And I just happen to be the messenger, and I accept that. But as far as my reporting, I stand by my reporting, and I think my reporting was all factual.
Were there ever times where you felt like you were having to protect CNN as an institution, being one of the faces of it?
No.
And certainly not doing
No,
that
never,
anymore, right?
No, I certainly didn't feel like I had to protect an institution. I felt like I was responsible for what came out of my mouth had an effect on, I think, like 4,800 employees around the world, some of them in war zones and in dangerous situations. So I wanted to be careful about what I said because I didn't want to put my colleagues in any jeopardy or danger. I also represented a very big, one of the biggest news brands in the world, if not the biggest. And so that part I understood, but I never thought that I had to protect anyone. I did feel that I had to protect the institution of journalism just as I am now and the freedom of the press. And so as a person who is part of the press, who is a journalist, I have to give people the facts without fear or favor. So that means whether you like it or not. And if I don't do that, then I'm not doing my job as a journalist.
Mm. Right now, we're seeing obviously a lot of discussion on foreign policy because of what's happening in Iran, concurrently what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And Don, it strikes me that as part of this conversation, we don't hear a lot of Black perspectives on foreign policy. I know that DL discusses this on his show, right, in a very candid and sharply critical way. But why is it that we don't see more of those perspectives? And how would the conversation around foreign policy change if we did?
Well, one, we don't see it because we don't demand it. We don't see it because we become inured to certain things that, oh, this is the way it is. And then people complain in their own silos and they don't complain with their remote controls or with their radio dials or with their fingers that they can click on. They don't complain or reach out to organizations and demand that you hear more people of color, especially Black people, discussing foreign policy. I can turn on the television, almost every single morning, every single afternoon, every single evening on the rare occasions that I do, and I can see a screen full of white people, mainly white men, talking about foreign policy. And so I think it's also a reflection of who our government has hired, who people hire. Usually people hire, whether that's in television or radio or whatever business, they hire people who look like them, people that they're familiar with. And I think we have to start demanding better. But I do think it's an oversight by an institution that should not be, overlooking people of color, especially in this moment, especially in a moment that Black journalists, especially Black women, are losing their jobs at record numbers, are being, laid off at record numbers. We need to stand up and demand better and demand accountability. And so I think that's the biggest thing that we can do, that what really matters.
And one of our longest standing civil rights institutions, the NAACP, is calling for the use of the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office in light of his threats to Iran and the way that he's been approaching that conflict. But even more specifically saying that he's unfit, unwell, and unhinged, as NAACP President Derek Johnson put it. Do you think that's a really effective move right now, or is it mostly symbolic?
Well, I think it's the truth, whether it's effective or symbolic. I think I've been saying for a while now that Donald Trump, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I've been saying for a while there's something wrong with Donald Trump, and we are living inside of his head, whether it's megalomania, whether it's narcissism, whether it's psychosis or neurosis or whatever it is, and he seems to be getting worse every single day. And his impulse control seems to be getting worse every single day. Anyone who anyone who posts on social media what he posts, anyone who behaves the way that he does, there's something going on. And usually with someone like that who is of his age, we would take the car keys away, or we would be putting him in some sort of place to keep watch over him.
And to that point, right, when President Biden was showing these really obvious signs of decline, whether it was physical or cognitively, we didn't see the NAACP calling for the 25th Amendment then. So I think there is this question right now about, okay, yes, we have an institution that we have all known and loved for a really long time doing this, but is it really reflective of the leadership we need, or is it kind of more in line with what you were saying about Dems earlier, not being forceful enough?
Even in Joe Biden's worst moments, whether he was cognitively declining or just tired or just aging, at his worst moment, it was better than Donald Trump at his better moment. And so I don't think that there is a, apples to apples comparison to the 25th Amendment for Donald Trump and the 25th Amendment to Joe Biden. At Joe Biden's worst moment, whatever you may deem that to be, he had capable, accomplished people around him credible people around him who could take over at any moment or handle anything that he needed or advise him on what to do in a certain moment. Donald Trump doesn't seem to have that. He seems to have yes men around him who are going along with his antics and with whatever is happening with him. They know something is not right. And so I think calling for the 25th Amendment as an institution, or even if you were in Congress or whatever, I don't see anything wrong with it, because you'd have to be blind or deaf in order not to hear and see what is happening with Donald Trump.
And do you think there should be an age limit for holding political office?
Well, I can't say that. I think that I don't know if there should be an age limit, because those things are individual. And, you know, I have a parent who's in her 80s right now, and she's sharp as a tack. And there are some people who are in their 80s who are not. So I think that's all individual, and we have to take that on its own merit. And I don't want to be ageist and say just because someone is of a certain age that they can't perform. But I will say that we need to make room for younger people in our politics, because even if it's just for ideas and fresh ideas and knowing how to navigate things in a new world that to many older people are, you know, it's just not even in their reality to, you know, many people, social media and all those things, they just don't know how to do it. And young people understand those and understands the issues. And sometimes I think that younger people can lead us into the future even better than older people. Older people have wisdom and knowledge from looking back, but young people are bright-eyed, and sometimes they are more optimistic. And so I think that we should make room for younger people in our politics.
Well, one last question here. If you can finish this sentence, no explanations. In America today, the truth doesn't get you fired. Blank does.
I just had this conversation. Are you ready for his answer?
Yes.
In today's day and age, the truth doesn't get you fired. Usually your penis does.
Fair enough. Well, Don, thank you so very much. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Well, hey, when life gives you lemons, you're bound to get a little zest. That's it for this episode, but drop us a line and let us know how you would fill in that blank. Be sure to keep up with us across all our platforms, and until next time, stay rooted, stay honest, and stay tuned.